Welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Alex Wolf here, and I am joined by my good buddy Prez again from the Strickland, from Draft Strickland, draft writer at the Strickland. And yes, we're continuing our discussion about the NBA draft. This is the third part of three. So if you haven't checked out the first two, be sure to do that. But in this episode, less so than talking about the Mavs pick that the Mavs might be screwing up for the Knicks this year, we talk about the late first, which seems to be the Knicks' sweet spot and an area that maybe they would look to trade into. We talk about Leonard Miller, Dariq Whitehead, Jett Howard, and others. And I get Prez's impressions on a number of guys that the Knicks might be able to look at in a really deep draft towards the end of the first round where they've succeeded before. So that's all coming up next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us a part of your daily routine. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell or the auto download function so you never miss an episode, because we do have 5 episodes a week for you guys, especially with playoff time coming up. Super important. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. And like I said, I'm joined by one of my buds from the Strickland, Prez, who is the lead draft writer there, who hosts the Draft Strickland podcast, who's the Friday host of the Pod Strickland podcast. There's a lot that Prez does with the draft, and he's one of my favorite people of whose brain to pick. And if you haven't checked it out already, like I said in the intro, we did 2 parts already to this, where we sort of broke down the situation for the Knicks as far as the Mavericks pick, and also some of the players that the Knicks could look at in that range should the Mavs avoid landing in the top 10 and end up in the 11 to 14 range and give the Knicks that opportunity. So we'll see how that goes over these last couple games. Let's go Mavs, I guess, so that the Knicks can hopefully get a late lottery pick this year in a really stacked draft. But it is a really stacked draft, and so that's why Prez and I figured that we would talk about some of the late first rounders as well. It's a range that the Knicks love. Obviously, they got Quentin Grimes and Emmanuel Quickley, both at the 25th pick. They got Deuce McBride early in the second round. They got Jericho Sims late in the second round. I mean, they've had a real penchant for like analyzing and finding talent late in the draft with this front office so far. So we're going to talk about that. There's a number of guys that Prez really liked. I kind of just asked him for a list. I've made it very clear on this pod that I have not done a ton of draft work yet. So this is really my first foray, and hopefully not last. We'll see how things go as far as the Knicks and their draft pick situation going up to the draft. But just in case this is like the last chance we get to talk about them, I wanted to talk about some of these late first round guys. So I'm going to get into it now with Prez. As we know, the Knicks love their late first round picks. So I figured we could sort of like rapid fire a few other guys here real quick and just kind of get into some other guys that if they wanted to try to maybe trade into their sweet spot of around the 25th pick or so, guys that might be intriguing prospects to look at. So we have Leonard Miller of the G League Ignite. This guy almost snuck into last year's draft, if I remember correctly. Like he sort of tested the waters, right? And was like coming like right out of high school, but had like a unique situation where he was at a prep, so that would have been possible. And he intrigues me. Like he seems sort of like what we were talking about with Taylor Hendricks, where it's like this guy's big, but he could do a lot of stuff. But I don't necessarily know that he's gonna like the shooting numbers aren't crazy. Like in the G League Ignite this year, if these numbers that I have in front of me are correct, shot about 54%, which is good. Like, I mean, that's really good for a player of that age, I feel like, but only 30% from 3 on like 2.5 attempts per game. But also like in the G League, which we're still trying to, I feel like we're still trying to figure out exactly how good of a measure the G League is for future indicators of success, like and the G League Ignite program and all that, but averaged a double-double at that level. which is against like fringe NBA talent, and averaged about about 2 stocks per game, which is also really good on the defensive end. I mean, what's your read on him? Is it just sort of a case of a guy that's like the numbers look pretty good. The size looks awesome. I mean, I think he's like 6'10" with like a 7-foot plus wingspan. So that's a plus, like for a guy that can potentially do some stuff with the ball. Like, what's the downside, I guess, because it seems like there's a lot of things in his favor.
Yeah, he's super interesting. To give like a 1-minute overview of the weird context for him that you alluded to. So he was dominating Canadian hoops leagues with poor competition, and his rise to fame as a prospect happened really quickly. Like over 6 months, he got invited to some tournaments, World versus USA, Nike championship thing. I forget what it's called. And he did fine in all those, more than fine. He did great. And there was questions about if he was eligible. He went into the draft combine last year and looked completely lost in the scrimmages. And I think that is why him going to the Ignite was a perfect choice. I am a huge fan of what the Ignite do for NBA prospects. What they do, in my view, is they pick the right roles for them to master certain fundamentals or get up to like baseline, at least in certain fundamentals. And they pick roles that will also in some ways challenge the players. And we're now on a couple of years of data to support that, right? And the latest data point is a much different kind of player, but Jaden Hardy on Dallas, who a lot of people liked, but like Keontae, his efficiency was woeful, decision-making was questionable. So he dropped, despite being a highly touted prospect. He dropped to the end of the first round. And now you see like he's a really good shooter who can score and do some things, even if he's not, the next great top 5 pick or whatever. Leonard in the G League, they're like, all that point forward stuff that you did in Canada, you're not going to do none of that. What you're going to do is you're going to run the floor hard. You're going to crash the glass. You're going to be a slasher sometimes. Maybe we'll let you handle the ball a little bit when Scoot is out, when he's injured. Scoot Henderson, the point guard for the Ignite, likely top 3 pick. And you can take threes sometimes, whatever. You can take mid-range shots sometimes, whatever. But mostly just do the little things, like be where you're supposed to be on defense. Learn how to play defense. Learn what helping the helper is. Like, he didn't know any of this stuff. Like, in the combine, it was literally like a guy who had never played organized basketball, even within the solar system of like NBA ball. And you can tell. So by the end of this Ignite season, you've seen him much more comfortable with where he has to be on defense. And because of his size, like you said, he can be pretty good now when he's in the right place on defense, because he's 6'10" with over 7-foot wingspan, but he has the agility of a guard in terms of how he moves. Like, he's just very comfortable dribbling the ball. Like, he looks more comfortable dribbling the ball than RJ Barrett, and he moves faster than RJ Barrett just on defense, to give an example, not to pick on RJ, but like, because it's more than just movement skills that make you effective, but he has the movement skills, and he's still only 19. So he's definitely a very intriguing prospect. And I agree with you that at some point, like, you're like, oh, he did this versus former like college all-stars. He's probably going to be pretty good. I don't know if the fit would be good in New York, just because they're trying to win now, and a player who's earlier on his basketball education learning curve and also can't shoot would probably make Tibbs go into like a rage spiral. But as far as the upside goes, he's definitely, like, if I was a team with more than one first round pick, I would be fiending to pick Leonard Miller, just because his tools are crazy, and we saw them actually begin to manifest into like actual winning plays and stuff like that this season.
All right, I'll be right back in with Prez to get into some more prospects, including Jalen Hood-Schifino, who really interested me quite a bit as Prez was talking about him. But I do just have to real quick award this week's Nissan Most Electric Player of the Week. brought to you by the all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Ariya. And I'm going to go a little off script here. I'm not going to pick just one player because I don't think that just one player deserves this award for this week. I'm going to take 3 players. I'm going to pick Emmanuel Quickley, Obi Toppin, and Quentin Grimes. Yes, the trio that against the Pacers the other day all had 30-plus points. Obi with 32 points, 6 assists, 3 boards. Emmanuel Quickley with 39 points, 9 assists, and 6 boards. And Quentin Grimes with 36 points, 6 boards, 5 assists, 3 steals. They were all just fantastic. The young core really coming out and doing their thing. And they were honestly just brilliantly fierce with how they attacked the Pacers. The Knicks really needed their contributions, and they gave them and helped the Knicks get a late season win that they maybe wouldn't have otherwise gotten without their big 3 available. And they were fiercely elegant and electric, stunningly powerful in their absolute dismantling of the Pacers as a shorthanded squad. So I think that there's a lot to love about just how electric those 3 are together on the court and how much chemistry the Knicks young core has built together to be able to step in and just kind of have a next man up mentality. So the 2023 Nissan Ariya packs pin you to your seat power and premium intelligence all in one EV. Pin you to your seat power. That's like what the Knicks young big 3 offers. The all new, all electric 2023 Nissan Ariya, the EV for people who love to drive. Shop now at nissanusa.com. So a kind of different end of the spectrum here to move to a different player. Dariq Whitehead from Duke, freshman, comes in, has really high pedigree, sort of in many ways based off what happened to the kid. It reminds me a lot of AJ Griffin in a way, in the sense that he came in and then just promptly got injured, and it sort of and was fighting injuries, and it sort of affected his ability to really get comfortable from what it sounds like. But I read your mini scouting report on him again before this that was in one of your draft previews on the Strickland, and it sounds like they sort of just then were like, all right, well, we may have brought you here to be like an alpha scorer, like RJ Barrett type, but because of how things have gone, we're now going to kind of slot you in as like a 3-and-D guy. And it sounds like he filled that role pretty admirably. The numbers don't really jump off the page, honestly, with him. It's like he scored 8 points a game in 20 and a half minutes per game. But he did shoot 43% from 3, which is impressive. I mean, what's your read on Whitehead? Do you think there's maybe a chance? I mean, I look at him and I think why wouldn't you go back for another year? Honestly, I wonder if there's maybe a chance that he would do that. But what's your read on Whitehead as far as if he does come out this year? What would be your expectations from him as a guy who had such a high pedigree, but sort of because of injuries and stuff wasn't really able to do as much as was expected this year?
Yeah, he's been tough for me to come to grips with until I got into more of his film, both not only at Duke, but in high school, because the reality of him is kind of boring. And if you look at his YouTube highlights, they're kind of whack, right? Even if you look at his high school YouTube, it's cool because it's a lot more dunks. And he used to, when he was much more slim, he used to be able to fly his junior year. Then he put on some weight, and he still had hops as a senior, but not oh my God, this is one of the best dunkers. And now he had a lower body injury his senior year, in preseason for Duke, and then during the season for Duke. So he's racked up a bunch of injuries. None of them particularly traumatic, right? No torn ACL or anything. But the fact that he was trying to keep his stock up and just play through it probably made it harder for him to, it takes a while to play yourself into shape. And we saw that. And he played himself into shape. And by that conference tournament, he was cooking in a 3-and-D role of what he was asked to do. He still couldn't really get by guys. And that was kind of disappointing. But even if you look at his high school tape, it's not really blowing by guys to the rim. It's more just oh, I can cross tween step back and there's just nothing you can do about it. And I'm going to do that. Everything comes back to his jump shot, even back then. So how high you are on Dariq kind of depends on what your appetite is for a 3-and-D wing who's really good at those things and might have a little bit more athleticism in the tank. Because he's not, at least right now, like, he's not going to blow by guys. He's not going to draw a lot of fouls. He's definitely a better passer than he showed at Duke. Duke doesn't really let their guys do that kind of stuff. Where he separates from AJ Griffin is like AJ was an all-time great shooting prospect, and Dariq is merely excellent, right? Which sounds like I'm hating, but like that matters. And ultimately, he's still so young that you can really do worse than a guy who is already a good defender at age 18 and already a ridiculous shooter and is 6'6". Like, it's kind of boring, but those guys don't grow on trees. And ultimately, it's why I can't see him falling out of the first round. But if he chooses to stay in, he's pretty much guaranteed a first-round pick just because of age and size and shooting. So what does that do for the Knicks? I don't know. Again, he'd be the first really young player they've taken. And that would be, they'd have to have some patience with him. But like we said before, they still need shooting, right? So he's an awesome shooter.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess technically the second young player they would ever take, if you count Trevor Keels, but definitely a different class of player than a Trevor Keels, I would say.
Yeah.
Because Keels still clearly has a lot of work to do. It seems like Whitehead already does quite a bit of NBA level stuff. All right, I'll be right back in with Prez to finish off this conversation. It was such a long, awesome convo about all these various guys in the draft. I really hope the Knicks end up with a draft pick this year because there's just so many good players. They're so intriguing. But I do have to remind you guys real quick that this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on anything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. That's my absolute favorite thing to do. I love me a same game parlay. I'm probably going to do it for the first game against the Cavs because why not? May as well like put your money where your mouth is, right? I'll probably bet Donovan Mitchell's under on his points scored. I'll bet Jalen Brunson's over for sure. Maybe take Emmanuel quickly for over 2.5 threes or something like that. Add that onto the ticket. Get some Obi Toppin points props if a point over under on there if Julius Randle isn't available. Throw that all together on one ticket, potentially make a bunch of bucks. And that's all on same game parlay, which is like the best feature of FanDuel, honestly. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right. Admittedly, the rest of this list I have very little knowledge of, but I want to give you a chance to, because I know these were some of your favorite guys. I want to give you a chance to make some quick cases for a few other guys as like late first round picks. So first I'll say Jalen Hood-Schifino, freshman out of Indiana. Give me the elevator pitch on him.
Well, he could end up being taken by the Knicks or another team in the late lotto. Like his range is pretty wide. That being said, the quick pitch on him is he played for Indiana as a 6'6" combo guard who very much ran their offense a lot of the time and like capably. Like his handle is legit above average and he can make real point guard reads. He's a plus passer. And like I said, he's 6'6" and he knows where to be on defense. Like he's a freshman, not as young as Dariq, but still a freshman. But it's not uncommon to watch Indiana and see him just nail a bunch of little things consecutively. Like, oh, help here, but not too far. Dig at the right time. Communicate. Help the help. Like he's probably ahead of the curve for his age on a lot of that like basketball processing stuff. He's inefficient because he really likes taking hard shots. The the Knicks would have to iron out. They would have to clean up his shot profile. He loves mid-range shots because he's a great shooter, great jump shooter, but he also takes really hard layups, kind of like RJ Barrett. He doesn't really he's not explosive. His arms aren't that long. So he'll always try to take tough layups and floaters and, turn around mid-range shots. And he has, like I said, he's a really good mid-range shooter, but he definitely relied on that too much in college. But if you were to say, to me, the upside case for him is like the Knicks take him and do what they did with Deuce and many other players and just clean up that shot profile. And all of a sudden you have a 3-and-D, 6'6" ball handling wing/guard. Like, even if he's not that athletic, there's something I like about that. And he's another guy who they could also probably find some upside by just telling him to shoot more threes. Like, he actually took like a meh amount of threes. I don't have it in front of me, but given his shooting skill, every time I watch them, I'm just like, why don't they just force him? I don't care how good he is at mid-range shots. Just make this guy shoot 3-pointers. If you squint and look at him, you're like, is that Devin Booker? Like, that's like sometimes the way he shoots, I'm like, he might be a really great shooter, but he just takes lots of dumb shots.
Well, you just made a pretty good case for him to me. It sounds pretty appealing to me. All right, moving to another guy, Jett Howard, wing out of Michigan. He's a freshman. What's your case for Jett?
Jett Howard I'll start with the bad stuff. He is super unphysical. He's not really athletic. He can't really get to the rim, so he relies on floaters. He's like the worst rebounding 6'8" person I've ever seen. His defense comes and goes a lot. He's also very young for a freshman, and did I mention he's 6'8", and his ball handling is pretty amazing. He's a great ball handler, but he only knows how to use it. I say only with air quotes. He uses it mostly to create jump shots. In that sense, I think he's similar to the prospect version of Kevin Porter Jr., where you're like, this guy is tall, has amazing handle, is a great shooter, can get to his jump shot whenever he wants. When is he going to learn to actually like go downhill with this? Because nobody can stay in front of him. The difference is Kevin Porter is athletic, Jett Howard really not, but the point kind of stands. I think the Knicks would be able, if they picked him, it would be like, we need shooting. He has shooting with size. His handle's incredibly above average. There's other stuff that needs work, but those are all things that we really like. If you look at who the Knicks have picked, it's usually guys who can dribble the ball, usually guys who can shoot pull-up shots, big programs. So he does have a lot of things the Knicks like, and that would just be a pure talent bet.
All right. Another guy that I feel like I know a little more about because I read in your preview, but I want to hear you state the case. Max Lewis, sophomore wing/forward out of Pepperdine. He definitely intrigues me.
So Max Lewis is interesting because how you view him kind of depends on how you view his situation. So he was the offense for Pepperdine, and they weren't a good team, but he was the offense. He was like, usage was over 30. He was their main playmaker, often their main passer, running pick and rolls. He was their best scorer by a large margin. So the question with Max is, if you reduce his role because he's not going to be running any offense in the NBA, does that make him better? Or do you lose the value because he needs the ball to do things like make good passes or, take tough mid-range shots and make tough mid-range shots? And, some players, if they don't do as many of the little things, become less helpful when they're not a big part of the offense. And you could argue that Max is, he's not a particularly good defender. Pepperdine did a lot of zone because they sucked at defense. So that didn't help. And then even though he's a good passer, the motor sometimes runs hot and cold with him. So he definitely could improve in that respect. But the guy, when it comes down to it, the guy is a great catch and shoot shooter. He's 6'8" with long arms. He's athletic. He can dribble the ball to create space. He can make very good reads passing, like as a connector even. So there's a lot to like there. His draft range is really wide just because, again, like he was the best player on a WAC team in a WAC conference. So, like, should we get that excited about that? I don't know. Maybe it's kind of eye of the beholder.
Yeah. It's I also feel like Pepperdine has produced a couple of NBA players in recent years too, right? Like, so it's like, wasn't that where Kessler Edwards went to school, Pepperdine?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, like WAC conference that weirdly, at least that school has at least produced one somewhat decent NBA player, although he's not exactly like lighting the world on fire. But yeah, I guess we'll see. Last name that I wanted to bring up, and this is a guy who admittedly, again, as a guy who didn't pay much attention to college basketball this year, I like had to look up who this even was because I wasn't familiar prior to when you sent me the name. But Kobe Bufkin, guard, sophomore out of Michigan, just on first blush, looking at his numbers and stuff, seems to have improved a lot from his freshman year to sophomore year, as well as getting a bigger role, but fits that sort of, like we talked about earlier, the profile of the Knicks loving second year players and guys that are not first year, freshmen, stuff like that. So give me just a quick pitch on Bufkin before we let you go.
He was a late riser on my board and everyone's board. He became a bigger part of Michigan's offense as the year went on and they got worse, which sounds like not a good sales pitch, but like he's a sophomore, but he's the age of a freshman. He's pretty young. And he's a guy who he came on so late that I actually didn't have him as a part of my article on Knicksy guys in the class. And then I added him in and he rated out as one of the most Knicksy because like IQ, to just pick a random guy, or like Quentin Grimes, he can shift between multiple positions. He's probably not the level of shooting prospect that those two are, but he's still a good shooter. He takes a decent amount of threes. He's a great free throw shooter, a great mid-range shooter. And the Knicks love a good pull-up shooter. And he can really get to the rack. Like he has very good ball handling skills. Not just for his age, but period. And for his size, like he's absolutely has better ball handling than most 6'5" guys. And he was also defending the best player on the other team a lot of the time, as long as it wasn't like a big man. So I'm just like, hold on a minute now. Like he's running their offense more. He's becoming their best scorer. He also is defending the most important perimeter guys on the other teams. And he's not unathletic. And he's like 19. Like he should probably be higher on my board. And I don't know. He feels like Branham, almost like one of those guys who's just people realize, oh, like he actually cooked at the end of the year. And then he goes into workouts and probably starts, embarrassing guys or something like that and shooting the lights out. And he might end up a higher pick. And he would definitely be a talent bet as well. Like we talked about, the Knicks obviously have a lot of talented guards. So he would be in the cauldron of competition every day, but he probably wouldn't result in many minutes early on. But as a guy who could shift between positions, defend, hit threes, ball handle, like you could do worse than that.
It sounds like you could do worse than that is going to be like the tagline of this draft if everything works out, because it seems like there's just so many good guys in this draft that it's going to be a fun draft cycle to cover if that's something that you're into, which I know you are, Prez. Before I let you go, do you want to let everybody know what you have coming up and plug Draft Strickland and all that stuff again?
Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter @_Presidente. The Strickland is where we do our draft analysis. We have lots of cool articles coming up. After March Madness finishes, we'll have some great longer articles, some shorter articles, eventually a big board, and not just my big board, but a bunch of people who help us out. And then we have the podcast Draft Strickland, which is right now every week. And if you really want to nerd out and learn about guys, I would definitely check out some of those episodes. So yeah, we got a lot of good stuff going on. And you're right about this class. Like if they keep a first rounder, there's like a zillion players who I could not only talk myself into, but be genuinely excited about. Even if I have my own preferences, like it's a 95% chance I'm going to be like, wow, I see why the Knicks need that, because there's so much talent.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to it. I guess the last thing we could say before signing off is here's hoping the Mavs don't screw this up.
Oh
and the Knicks get to hold on to that draft pick, because otherwise that would be kind of tragic to miss out on this class potentially, although I'm sure the Knicks will do some wheeling and dealing, maybe even with some of those protected picks they got last year to get back into the first round if they feel really passionate about somebody, because they've definitely shown that ability in the past. So it's going to be a fun and interesting draft cycle that we'll have a much better idea of how to look at in just a couple weeks, when we know if the Knicks are more likely to get a draft pick off the Mavericks or not. But Prez, thanks so much, man, for coming on and talking and giving me this great primer, because as I said, I haven't really started looking into this stuff too much yet, but I'm sure a lot of people really appreciate the primer as well. So thanks so much for coming on and giving the time, man.
You got it.